Hello, hello. Welcome. Thank you for coming to our member benefit webinar. Back in April, we unveiled our new membership structure, which is catered to serve the holistic needs of our community. Our new structure includes self-selected tiers, access to community connection and resources, a deepened investment in professional development, and extended free or discounted benefits offered by our partners. And our membership structure will be going live starting July 1. So this is all leading up to the July 1 effective date. We're thrilled to have a fantastic lineup of member benefit partners as we embark on this exciting new chapter for the Guild. Whether you're a current member or considering joining, this is for you. Each week through June, we are highlighting one or two partners who will share valuable tools, resources, and insights on different topics. You can find our full lineup of member benefit partners on our website. Today, our featured member partner is Dr. Nicole Avant. They have a lot of expertise in medical and health justice, as well as racial equity training, and we are so excited to have them. But I'll leave the bulk of the introduction to Dr. Avant. If you have any questions, please hold them for the end during our Q&A, unless it's to clarify anything in the presentation. You can always put your questions in the chat. Thank you all for joining, and I am going to pass it off to Dr. Avant.
Thank you, Precious. I appreciate that. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Nicole Avant. I'm the founder, owner, and CEO of Avant Consulting Group. Who we are a collective of academics, health professionals, sociologists, racial equity experts, and organizational strategists. And we are committed to supporting organizations, enhance patient outcomes, promote employee psychological safety, as well as engage communities authentically. So, a little bit about me. I was born and raised. I get all of my flavor from Chicago, Illinois. I didn't have the language to describe it, but at that time, I really saw how structural inequities really kind of shape how we have access to health promoting resources, such as really solid program structures and parks and businesses and robust housing and transportation and so forth. I didn't start out in pharmacy. I did start out in health. I actually got my start. I got my BS in finance with honors from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I then pursued my doctor of pharmacy, magna cum laude from the University of Illinois at Chicago. After that, I kept going. I did 2 pharmacy residencies at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. After that, I became a professor, or eventually after that, I actually had a couple professorships, but I ended up at UC. I was hired as the first Black woman professor and chief diversity officer at the fifth oldest college of pharmacy. And I was the only Black professor there. I'm board certified in ambulatory care. And a lot of people think that I work on an ambulance. No, it means that I manage chronic diseases. I'm board certified to do that, managing like diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, which we'll talk about on the last service that we're offering. But that's what that means. Some of my research include when I was a chief diversity officer, I researched implicit bias, I researched microaggressions. I wrote some papers around structural inequities and the pharmacist's role, using our oath to really navigate that. And then also, how do we navigate marginalized identities within power dynamics when we're in power spaces, in spaces that we are operating as a woman or as Black or as a Black woman and so forth. I've received some awards for my work. I taught racial ethnic health disparities, and that was a really good way to start Avant Group, because my students did a project to really show how neighboring communities, one white and one Black, can have different outcomes based on context, based on structures, and based on historical injustices. So if you want to learn more about my work, please find me at NPR, Reuters, Currents in Pharmacy, Teaching and Learning, Innovations in Pharmacy, and the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education. Some of the clients I have served include health systems, government entities, academic institutions, nonprofits, and some for-profits. So this is the structure of our talk today. I'm going to talk about our offerings. How we got our start was with racial equity training. Like I said before, when I first started out, when I was doing this work, I was a professor and I really wanted my students to capture like pictures of playground structures, and I wanted them to really capture how structures impact health. A local health system heard about that work and asked if I would be willing to replicate what I was doing in the classroom at their health system. And so that's how we created our very first offering, which is the racial equity training. We've since evolved and we offer some restorative organizational structures we'll talk about, some assessments, and then we have a new offering, which I'm excited to talk about, called Health Equity Circles. So a little bit about,
Sorry,
oh,
Dr.
please.
Avant, you're not screen sharing your presentation.
Oh, is it not? Hold on, let me stop share and share it again.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, thank you. I usually ask, is it sharing? But then I always feel like it's a redundant question because the answer is always yes. But here it is. It wasn't. Um, what about now? Did it come through?
Yes, it is up now. Yes, it's just
Okay.
not in presenter mode.
Okay. Yes, I just want to make sure. Okay, good. So is it in presenter mode now?
Yes, it is. You're good to go.
Okay. So this is the overview of our talk today. We'll talk about I'll talk about my first offering, racial equity training. We do this in phases. Phase one is really about interpersonal bias interrupters. So we talk about implicit bias. We talk about stereotypes or the pictures that we have in our mind of what people should look like and act like. My research is microaggressions. So we have a session that talks about how implicit bias or unconscious bias manifests in our words, in our behaviors, the different types of microaggressions, gender, sexuality, the hidden messages of microaggressions, and what we can do to mitigate microaggressions from happening, and when they occur, what needs to be done. Also, part of the interpersonal bias interrupters phase, we talk about how we all cause harm. And it's really important for me that we engage in some social identity mapping in that session. So we map out our identities, and it's always challenged by choice, but we map out our identities by race, gender, age, body size, sexuality, and so forth. And then our attendees choose which identities are they operating from. They're operating from power, and which identities are marginalized. And we talk about some common characteristics that are associated with each of those identities and how we're showing up. The goal of that is really to show like we don't like when we are harmed. It doesn't feel well. But sometimes when we are operating from our power identities, we tend to do the things that we don't like done to us when we are operating from our marginalized identities. The second phase is where we talk about structural inequities, and we talk about how we've been socialized, if we're especially if we're focusing on race. We talk about what is race making, race and privilege. Then we talk about the multiple levels of inequity. So there is, the bias piece, which we talked about in phase one, that internalized bias piece, and then there's this interpersonal piece, but then there's these larger structures that really shape how the outcomes we see and then how we internalize those outcomes. We also talk about the social structural determinants of health, how Redline and the GI Bill and so forth shape how we distribute health promoting resources. We also created a class called Black History from Africa to Breonna Taylor. It's one of our, it's definitely a favorite. And then enhance, and how do we enhance racial awareness and action? And then there's a phase three that I borrow heavily from Adrienne Marie Brown's work on emergent strategy. And it's like, how do we change? It really focused on those six themes that she talked about around fractals and so forth. So our facilitation framework, we hold space for individuals. We don't really do a lot of judgment because we show up authentically with vulnerability as facilitators. We talk about how we have messed up, how we get it wrong. And so it's a space for people to just reflect on their biases and how they have benefited from them, and how they have been harmed by them. And so it's really that it's not a scary thing. I know a lot of times people come in and they're kind of afraid, like, okay, why do we have to do this talk? But it's really helpful. It's really beneficial. I think people think that it's really cathartic once they leave. I want to talk about our first success story. Was with a client. It was actually our very first large client, and it was when our students did their project. The CDO reached out to us and asked if we would be willing to do something similar. So I did just one workshop for their HR leadership team, they asked me to come back. We did it again for the entire HR team. And then they said, hey, we want you to entrain our entire health system. And so that contract just kept building and building. Once they said they want us to train their entire staff, that was a year, but then it became 2 years and it became three. So it was a really successful project. What we did with that client is we did half day microaggressions training 4 times a year for new leaders. Maybe they were just hired or promoted. We also engaged a couple of times with their quarterly leadership meetings that they had. We also did their new hire orientation. So every other Monday we were on site doing those trainings. We also developed a structural competency training specifically for clinical staff so that they could contextualize health and look beyond personal choices and look beyond biology and behaviors to describe health. We customized some training for the Council on Diversity as well. And then we also had some personalized training for employees flagged for additional services. So maybe they had engaged in some questionable behavior. So we would do some one-on-one coaching with them as well. So that's our racial equity training. I want to talk a little bit about how we've evolved to really talk about how we can transform workplace cultures through restorative work. And we know that transformative and restorative workplace cultures honor and integrate difference. It embodies empathy and validation, but it also embodies accountability and not turning away or shying away from conflict. So we help organizations create organizational structures. Uh, we talk a lot about identity-based conflict roots, so conflicts around race and gender and so forth. We use de-escalation and nonviolent communication. We apply restorative justice to repair that harm. We embed conflict resolution into the workplace culture, so by building structures. Well, before we even do that, we talk about some community agreements, like this is what we believe, these are our values, so that we can prevent some of the conflict from happening, but when they occur, this is what we have agreed that we're going to do. This is for all staff, leaders, and HR. We can do this in a few or several 2 to 3 hour sessions, depending on how large the organization is. But the outcomes include conflict resilience, trust, and team cohesion. So it's just a way to enhance civility at work. So hopefully my computer will keep moving. I think I'm stuck. Is it stuck for you, Precious?
It's under
Oh,
creating organizational structures.
okay. It's just
Yep.
moving slow, I guess. Sorry. So if you give me a second, I don't know why it's moving so slow. Well, I'll just keep it here. So we had a client that asked if we would come in. They wanted to be an anti-racist organization. So we did a lot of work with their executive team and their all staff trying to define what does that mean to be an anti-racist organization? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? How do you know that you've achieved being an anti-racist organization? So we developed some community agreements for them for courageous conversations, like what I think I asked the very first question I did was, what do you need to feel safe in the workplace? And from there, we were able to build out these community agreements. I also hosted another session where several sessions where I wanted to understand or unearth conflicts instead of suppressing. People typically like to suppress things that are happening, but we can't really address it if we don't know. So once we identify the types of conflicts, I had asked them like what would have made it better, what did they need, what did they want. So we developed some conflict elevation pathways with HR and non-supervisory staff. We also did some supervisor coaching like once a month on how to have and engage in these anti-racist conversations and support. We did trainings on recognizing and interrupting racism in the moment. And if you don't feel comfortable in the moment, what's the next best option? They also had an equity syllabus that we reviewed and provided some feedback on for new hires so that people are not coming to the organization feeling really overwhelmed with all of this. We also looked at some survey data that they have, and we made some database recommendations around that. And then we created or drafted an anti-racist framework accountability structure for them to use so that they know, like, this is what we say we want. This is how we know we've gotten there. And then we just had regular engagement with the program lead group. So it is, I think we're moving. Okay.
Yep, you're
So,
moving.
right. And so I talked a slide earlier because I was stuck on that slide, but just a little bit about, I think I already said it, but this goal was to build an inclusive anti-racist culture through transformative practices and a sustainable accountability. Some of the scope of work included culture shift support, capacity building, how do we change, how do we navigate conflict, some supervisor development, some equity integration, and then we reviewed some of the data, which I already said, and then creating an accountability framework. And so, like client one, this work continued to expand beyond that first contract. Even when we were in the midst of our first year, we expanded it and added services because we were quickly able to see that we needed to shift in what we were doing. Now, one of the first things that deliverable we provided was the community agreements, and we made some community agreements based on the conversations that we held with staff. And so I think we grouped them in emotional regulation, which I provided some examples here of what that looked like, accountability, safety, because transparency came up a lot for them. So transparency had its own section too. What does it mean to be transparent within the organization? The other thing that we created, another deliverable, is how to elevate a conflict at work, especially when you have less power than the person who has harmed you. And so I came in just to held a series of conversations to understand the types of conflict. And what we found with that was that, for example, when there were multiple departments working on a project, sometimes there would be missed deadlines and non-response to email prompts, and that really kind of annoyed individuals. It was also noted that staff had unpleasant or borderline disrespectful interactions with the supervisor on another team. Like maybe within their team they would do great, but when they had to work with other teams, there was some it was contentious. Um, we also found that when they're working with other agencies, sometimes they're outside the other agency will want to only work with the white male staff and not with the black lead, like they didn't respect black authority. And then there was conflict sometimes when new people would be brought in. They would want to reinvent the wheel, whereas the staff that had been there for a while didn't want to try new ways. Another common conflict that we saw was that when two departments were working on a project or an initiative, one would be doing their work behind the scenes, but they wouldn't get the recognition like the one that was in front. The staff said when we asked what they wanted sometimes to handle the situations on their own, to be able to do one-on-ones or call in and have these brave conversations. They also wanted some time in team meetings to have a space to kind of talk about what's happening. They want to be able to acknowledge that something just occurred, even in a meeting, to acknowledge the pinch moment, to be able to say, ouch. They wanted one-on-one dialogue with and support from their supervisor. They didn't want to navigate it alone. They also asked for mediation support to create agreements. And then they wanted a work group to explore many more of the work and task related differences. And so we created a structure for them, or more so like a process for them of what happens when you see conflict or a pinch moment in a meeting, in normal everyday work interactions, in an organizational process or communication or email. We decided based on what we heard that maybe a call-in would be appropriate first. And if that didn't work, to escalate to mediation. And if that didn't work, to maybe lean in supervisor to get a supervisor on board. Another service that we offer include assessments. I have been told, and I love this description of me, but I've been told I'm a conduit for truth telling. That has been true for me my whole life, ever since I was a child, a teenager, strangers would tell me their entire life stories, and that has definitely not changed as I have aged. So I think it's a great way for me to uncover issues and problems that are happening because people are just so eager to share. And so then how can we fix a problem if we don't know what the problems are? And so in the assessment work that I do, I create brave spaces for honest employee feedback. So we can do that through surveys, which is not my favorite, but I do love the one-on-one conversations and the focus groups. I feel like the surveys, you can't really go deep in a way that you can when you're having those conversations. We also conduct thematic analysis to uncover patterns and experiences, patterns of exclusion, concerns, and workplace culture. We work to identify invisible dynamics that maybe some people can see, but many others can't, related to power, privilege, microaggressions, and exclusion. We translate. I'm a really good insights generator. So we translate insights into targeted training and leadership development. We equip organizations with the tools necessary to recognize, respond, and repair harm. We build customized training that reflects actual staff experiences. And then we also promote ongoing organizational learning and accountability. So the last case that I want to talk about, success story here, this is a client, and they didn't have like a year-long engagement. Their contract was very short-term. They had asked that we come in a few years ago and do some implicit bias training. And then they asked us to come in at the top of this year to do some gender-based harassment and bias training. So this was our second time coming in. And we conducted interviews and focus groups with employees to try to understand, what's happening, what's the impact of that. We used thematic analysis to identify the patterns of harm and exclusion. We shared those themes and with exemplars or direct staff quotes to illuminate lived experiences. We shared those with leadership. We did some management training as well. We presented those findings with clear, actionable recommendations, and it really raised awareness of hidden pain points. And it was it was a beautiful space to be had, especially when we did the staff trainings as well as when we did the management trainings. We supported leadership in developing strategies to improve conditions, repair harm, build trust, and also mitigate harm and then, prevent harm from happening. We ensured that employees felt heard, they felt validated and seen in the process. And so that was a really great experience. The themes that we found in doing that work with this client, that gender-based exclusion and dismissal was present. There were gender double standards in leadership. I remember there were a few stories where women said that men could be more animated and they wouldn't be looked down upon or even corrected in a way that women had to be a little bit more quiet and restricted. There was transphobia and dead naming present. There was unsolicited surveillance. Some of the attendees said that people were taking pictures of them without their consent. There was physical contact, unwanted hugs, a lot of unwanted hugs, unwanted comments regarding their body. Maybe they should work out and comments such as that. There was an unfair division of labor and gender expectations. One guy said something like, I'm expected to do a lot more of the manual labor just because I'm a dude. And there was a workplace culture of silence and inaction, like a bystander effect. People are just kind of watching things happen, but people don't necessarily always say something. But when people do say something, they felt that the organization had a really positive response and that they were kind of Johnny on the spot. And then that there was some differential treatment based on race at the intersection of gender. So the last thing I want to talk about before we close out here, and I think I'm still doing good on time, Precious.
Yeah, you're doing great on time. Hmm.
Okay. The last thing is where this is a new offering. We want to create some health equity circles, really to empower obesity care and chronic disease navigation. This is for individuals, this is for caregivers, this is for organizations who value inclusive wellness, disability justice, and health equity. It centers the lived experience of people and culturally responsive education and chronic disease care, and it will help close the gap in chronic disease care for people who live in larger bodies. Because now obesity care often centers weight loss over holistic health. Um, there's this idea that health equals small, health equals thin, health equals weight. And that's such a very limited narrative, because people in larger bodies, face weight stigma, they face provider bias, they face care avoidance, and all of these things negatively impact hair health. There are social factors that also impact health, such as race, disability, immigration status, or insurance type, income, can really impact access to safe quality care. And there's just a lack of trauma informed, inclusive education and support spaces. So, why this matters? Many people with diabetes, hypertension, or high cholesterol lack the support needed beyond medical care. They are constantly navigating weight stigma, not just at the doctor's or clinician's office, but in their home, in their religious institutions, in their neighborhoods, at work. They're navigating ableism, they're navigating racism, and all of these things shape health outcomes. Employees and individuals need trusted spaces for education, support, and advocacy. Disability and chronic illness aren't afterthoughts, they're part of real wellness. So, what we want to offer are group sessions focused on community, peer learning, and self advocacy. And there is some new data out that is very helpful, especially as it relates to obesity care, being led by your peers, people who also navigate obesity as well. In this space, support space, there's an emphasis on equity, there's an emphasis on belonging, there's an emphasis on justice, not just adhering to medications if people choose to medicate and treat it. But it's a space that welcomes people in larger bodies, disabled folks, caregivers, and their allies. What topics we want to cover? We want to have health education, the ABCs of diabetes, A1C, blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, medication, technologies such as continuous glucose monitors. We want to talk about how do we manage these diseases through nutrition, hydration, movement, stress, minimizing stress, and making sure that we're resting as well. Their peer support, I think, is necessary so you don't feel like you're alone and that someone else gets it without you having to use many words. But you feel validated. There's a group discussion, there's resource sharing. Maybe how do you get 100, you know, milliliters of water a day or ounces of water a day? What is it that you do? Because I'm struggling with that and sharing that. Or how do you get your 30 grams of fiber a day? Or how do you get your 100 grams of protein, or whatever your goals are? And just sharing that information and building solidarity so people know that they're not alone. We'll also address class, race, insurance type, and access barriers. We'll provide some advocacy tools to navigate fat phobia in many different parts of their lives, how to navigate bias, how to navigate access barriers, and then some of the outcomes, depending on if they're enrolling in the virtual space versus the in-person space, would be blood pressure, A1C, and so forth. So the format and flow, 90-minute, the initial session that blends education, advocacy, peer support, grounding, getting into our bodies, feeling our bodies, knowing where it feels good, where it hurts, connections to ourselves, connections to others. We want monthly or bi-monthly sessions, 90 to 120 minutes. Some of these will be virtual and accessible. And then we'll also offer private group or community space for in-between session connections. We'll customize our handouts, tools, and resource guides. And again, the topics would include how, the pathophysiology of diabetes, or and when I say pathophysiology, I mean like what's going wrong in the body when we have been diagnosed with diabetes, and how do we treat that? How do we manage hypertension? How do we manage hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, high blood pressure? What are the different types of medications, and what are the side effects of those medications, and what's the mechanism of action for those medications? Things like that. I'm a pharmacist, so of course I have to talk about the meds, devices that can be used, physical activity, how much is needed, what we should be eating, partnering with the nutritionists in our support groups as well. And again, the emphasis is on disability justice, fat liberation, access, and self advocacy. And we're hoping to build self trust and trust amongst one another. The impact: reduce shame and stigma around body size and disability, stronger communities of care and support so they don't feel like they're navigating this alone. Again, greater trust of self, progress towards an equitable person-centered care, less shame, more confidence with the body that they have and loving the body that they have, more knowledge in managing their chronic conditions, stronger self-advocacy in healthcare settings so that if they are afraid to even see a clinician, that they know like these are the tools, this is what you need. And maybe we can even offer some communal advocacy depending on the logistics. Greater belonging and solidarity, tools to live well and not just survive, and a path towards equitable wellness in workplace and life. Who is this for? Is it for your team? Are you an ideal partner? Yes. If you are an obesity care clinic or endocrinologist office, this will be really helpful for you. If you're a community health center or a federally qualified health center, if you are a disability justice organization, if you are part of a medical school in public, or you manage public health programs, if you are part of advocacy groups serving BIPOC and low income communities, if you are an employee yourself, if you're an individual yourself that's managing diabetes, hypertension, or chronic conditions, and you want to be a part of this cohort, if you are disabled and you're looking for inclusive education and support, if you are HR, if you're part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion team or council, or you want a justice center wellness program or resource to offer your employees, if you're a caregiver, if you're an advocate, if you're an ally seeking community and tools, it's a good space. And so, how do you join? Excuse me. Individuals can join our next open cohort by sending me an email. Organizations can sponsor seats or host private sessions for staff. There's a sliding scale available, and I know we also have some prices listed on the website. But know if those prices, please don't let it be cost prohibitive. So please reach out and let me know, and we can discuss next steps, but this is the pricing that's on the website. And in terms of the racial equity, conflict management training, and the assessments, we're offering a 10% discount. And for these health equity services, they're $270 for 6 sessions. But again, we might be able to run your insurance if that's possible. And if not, if you can't afford that, based on certain factors, we'll be able to offer a sliding scale. So here's a QR code if you want to connect with me, if you have any questions for me. But I thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avant. This was so informative and helpful for our members to get to know you and the health justice and equity support that you're offering to our members. Um, I'm seeing in the chat. Yes, thank you. Are there any questions? Judith, do you have any questions that you'd like to share with Dr. Avant or us?
I really don't. This was, a very different kind of focus for me and very helpful, particularly as we are grappling with all of the forced changes on all of us in the nonprofit world. And as I said, our world is the arts and arts learning, people of all ages, people with all abilities and sets of circumstances, and to think about it from a different point of view about our ability to be together in one space and work together is so important. And it is so reassuring to speak with people that understand that clarity and empathy and understanding are so essential, no matter what we're talking about, is really important. I have another meeting to go to, but I am so glad I came. This was a very different approach for me, and I value what I've learned. I took some screenshots and we'll share it with our members on Friday. We do a member network Zoom on Friday, and I'll share the information.
Great. Yes. And we are recording, and this recording will be on our YouTube, so you'll be able to share that too with your group.
Thanks.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you can join us for our last two webinars, we've got Natalia Arias, who is offering personalized branding, as well as Zuli and Nero, who is offering a lot of executive coaching and organizational strategic planning. So if you would like to sign up for those webinars, please feel free. I'll put it in the chat. And those will wrap up our webinar series before the membership goes live on July 1. So thank you so much. Please stay in touch, join our newsletter and our social media, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.